Well, good evening and welcome to this British Academy event. My name's Richard Hussey. I teach in the Department of History at Durham University, where one of our speakers, Paul, is Honorary Professor. Tonight's event, though, forms part of the British Academy Summer Showcase, a free festival of ideas for curious minds. And the festival celebrates the best new research in history, psychology, sociology and more, with online talks, discussions and demonstrations, plus self-guided audio walks, all taking place throughout the week. You can find out more at britishacademy.ac.uk/summer showcase. But tonight, our event this evening, Picturing Politics, Framing Parliament, is going to take us on a virtual tour of the House of Commons to explore how we see and have seen Parliament at work, to discover more about how photography and sketch can visually capture the kinetic energy, drama and atmosphere of parliamentary politics. And so it gives me a very great pleasure to welcome our speakers. Dr. Paul Seward, the British Academy Wolfson Research Professor and Director of the History of Parliament Trust, and Jessica Taylor, the official photographer of the House of Commons, to our virtual stage tonight. We'll speak in conversation for about 45 minutes before opening up to your questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And if your question's for one of the particular panelists, please do indicate that, and we'll hopefully make sure we direct it to them. But without further ado, let's kick off by me asking Paul to just outline the research project which brought us together this evening to discuss how the past might relate to the present and why you're interested in these pictures of the House of Commons.
Thanks so much, Richard. Yeah, I mean, the research project as a whole is an attempt to think about Parliament, not as we usually think about Parliament, as just a place to do politics in which, you know, people shout at each other, but as an institution, a fantastically complex, extraordinary institution in which people come together from multiple places and multiple backgrounds and with very, very different ideas to negotiate, argue, debate, and sometimes even agree with each other. And I just wanted to trace the history of that sort of evolution of Parliament as an idea, as an institution, as a community, as well as it can be sometimes. And one aspect of that I really wanted to look at is to think about how we see what is going on in Parliament, how we see and understand all of this complex mix that's happening. And of course, our view is not sort of straightforward. It's always a mediated view. It's always seeing it through somebody's eyes, through the TV camera, the journalist, the sketch writer, and the photographer. And these artists who we're going to talk about. So, you know, it's those people who frame for us parliamentary politics and how it goes on, and the people in newspapers and news websites and everything else who think about it and interpret it for us.
Well, on that note, let me ask Jess, who's our other speaker, to tell us about how she's framing Parliament today and her role as the House of Commons photographer.
So I'm the Commons photographer, as you know. I have been working in the House of Commons, well, in Parliament, as the photographer about 10 years now, which is, I think, quite interesting because I feel like a lot of people think this is quite a recent thing, maybe a few years or so, or since Brexit. But it's actually quite a long period of time for me in my career. And it doesn't just cover the chamber. I cover all different aspects, including big parliamentary projects, House of Commons campaigns. But obviously I am probably most well known for my work around the chamber, which started off capturing the budget. So it would be quite a kind of sparing thing. And obviously as the the demand has increased, I obviously have been quite busy in there. So I take photos almost daily from the Commons chamber. And I see my role really as reporting what happens in the House of Commons and then trying to make that make sense to the public.
That's really interesting. What Jess says about sort of interpreting it and making it make sense to the public. I mean, there is a vast amount of business that goes on in the House of Commons. It's really complex, and the public, like the politicians themselves, need somebody to sort of interpret it and tell them what's going on. And even more than that, they need somebody to sort of give them some sense of the drama that's going on. We understand these things much better when they're slightly dramatized, slightly personalized, when we can get into the story. And I think that sounds to be exactly what Jess is doing, trying to make the story and let us understand how it works.
So how does that happen before photography then? That's the bit I'm quite interested in.
Yeah, I mean, we'll find out, because the images that you take, Jess, have always reminded me so much of the images that I've been looking at from the illustrated magazines of around about the 1880s to 1910s of Parliament at work. These aren't photographs, but they're sketches made up in the chamber or worked up later. And this is a really new and distinctive thing to that period. People just didn't have readily available images of what was going on in the chamber before that period. There's the Illustrated London News, which is the world's first regular illustrated newspaper that starts printing occasional pictures from its beginnings in 1842, but they're usually really quite static pictures. They're wood engravings, and so they're a touch dull, a touch they don't show movement really. It's with the arrival of another newspaper called The Graphic in 1869 that you get a big competition to the Illustrated London News. And its trademark was high quality art. It really, really wanted to show decent pictures. It's like, the advent of photojournalism in a way. And then after that, there's an explosion around about the late 1880s, 1890s, which has got something to do with the introduction of photomechanical reproduction processes, which makes the reproduction of good quality images much better. You don't have to go to woodblock engraving. You can do this sort of much more easily, and you get these wonderful magazines like The Graphic, The Sphere, Black and White, which carry this sort of stuff, and the Illustrated London News picks it up. And what's fascinating is that they have artists working for them all the time, who are doing lots of different things. They're doing foreign news, they're doing domestic news, they're doing royal stories quite often. And with British imperialism in the 1880s and 1890s, they've got fantastic things to do in Afghanistan, Burma, wherever, Egypt, Sudan. But one of the things they do in a big way is Parliament, and there's a highly professional group of artists who will see. Harry Furness is probably the famous name, but many others who will talk about: Paul Renoir, Samuel Begg, Reginald Cleaver, Alexander Boyd, Sidney Prior Hall. These are all little known now, but at the time they're really, really great storytellers. Really, they tell wonderful stories.
So I just wonder if Jess can give us some examples of how, when she's taking photographs today, she's also sort of framing, selecting images to tell a story.
Sure. So for me, storytelling, obviously, it's the major role in what I do. And I think that when I'm telling a story, it kind of requires a bit of imagination around, where I'm going to be, what the business is of the house, what I consider might be kind of newsworthy kind of points within a debate, or within the week, the parliamentary business of the week. So kind of looking out for those highlights, and then almost like anticipating where those shots might happen. So you kind of almost make the image up in your head before the event's even begun. And then from there, try and figure out the best vantage point as to where to take it. So I think on the screen now, you can see a photograph that I took of the then father of the house, Ken Clarke, who was putting his last questions to the Commons during PMQs. And I had a feeling, obviously, that someone might get up and say something afterwards, after he made his last question to the House. So I felt like I should probably be on standby and get in a spot where I think, there might be a nice shot of, I think you can see Theresa May's next to him as well, which is quite nice. So get myself on a position where I might get, someone congratulating him or an idea of tributes. So this was taken from across the chamber floor, from the other side, so just behind the opposition benches. And what I didn't expect, obviously, was the waving of the order papers. So instead of kind of working against those and seeing them as an obstacle and trying to dodge out the way, I thought they worked quite nicely in telling the story. So I used that to almost frame Ken Clarke, and I think you kind of get that from the shot. I mean, I'd like to think you do. So it draws your eye into him and summarizes basically what the story is there. Equally, we have another shot here. This was from when Speaker Bercow stepped down as the Speaker. Well, I say that it was when he made a statement to announce that he was stepping down as Speaker of the House of Commons. And again, on my arrival, I knew I wanted to summarize this in some way and tell the story in one frame. I didn't quite know where I was going to go. I think I stood on the chamber floor and thought I'd take a shot from there. But I looked around and I could see that his family was sat in the galleries and his team was sat up there. And I thought it might actually be quite nice to get a higher up vantage point. So I headed up there, sat kind of in a near enough position in the hope that he would glance up, and sure enough, he did, and this was the result. So there's those stories within one frame, and storytelling within one moment. Then equally on the other side, I quite like to capture glimpses and moments in around the chamber and try and give more of a rounded picture of what life is like in the Commons, and sometimes through a series of shots, or sometimes wider shots. So here you've got the SNP benches, and I feel like each member, when you can go back to a photo and have a look at it again and again and see different members' reactions to a certain debate. So I quite like to do that in my work. And then again, kind of individuals, so picking out individuals within debates and then sewing those together to tell a story. So visually, for me, storytelling is basically an attempt to visually translate what's happening in the chamber. And I try through my photographs to kind of capture those key moments and little nuances and exchanges between individuals to kind of give a sense of what's going on and what it's like to be in there.
What's really interesting is that the similarity of some of those pictures to what they're drawing and publishing in the magazines in the 1890s, especially. These artists sort of do really, I suppose you can divide it into two things. There are these fantastically big set pieces where they draw a full chamber in which something sort of dramatic and important is happening. This is from 1882 by Thomas Walter Wilson for the Illustrated London News, drawing a picture of Gladstone standing up at the dispatch box and explaining the new rules of procedure in 1882. It sounds very dry, but it's actually the great effort to stop the massive campaign of obstruction that was being perceived as just about clogging up the whole of the House of Commons business. So it's a big moment. The House is full. You can see extra chairs being put in at the back of the chamber. And these are, that's probably a centre spread, I think it is. And then there are others for full page. This is an Illustrated London News piece, much later, 1913, drawn by Samuel Begg. this is capturing a single moment when Percy Illingworth, the Liberal chief whip, is getting embarrassed by the reference to Marconi shares. This is the great scandal of 1913 that had been bought by his predecessor on behalf of the Liberal Party, a sort of a party funding scandal. And he's being asked, there's this word, this phrase being thrown across the chamber, where is your co-trustee? And he's giving them this filthy look. So those are the attempts in which an artist is putting together a sort of collection of people and ideas into a single shot in Jess's terms. And then there are these other things that Jess would sort of recognize these as her little shots across the chamber, which just try to encapsulate a day's debate in terms of little vignettes. There's Gladstone, a characteristic pose of Gladstone cupping his hand to his ear, trying to hear what's going on, and Lord Randolph Churchill across the dispatch box from him. This is the debate on Parnell's bill, on the great Irish leader of the Irish Party, Charles Stewart Parnell's bill on tenant relief, on trying to stop evictions of Irish tenants. It's by Sidney Pryor Hall, who's a fantastic artist. I think this one's for the Graphic, who specialised in doing this, but lots of little things going on. And then occasionally you have this sort of thing, something going on outside the chamber. This is Albert Rollitt, who's being congratulated by women just outside the chamber in the lobby on when he's just brought in his private member's bill on women's suffrage in February 1892. So a Reginald Cleaver sketch for the Daily Graphic. You can always tell there's a slightly cruder, more sort of sketchy approach to it, and much less worked up. But those are the, I think they feel so much like Jess's pictures.
Yeah, and it looks very much like it is now. So it's quite remarkable to kind of have a look, and like you said, that I can see similarities between like my work and the work previously, but there have been changes, haven't there?
Yeah, I mean the chamber that are in my pictures was destroyed in 1941 and replaced by the chamber we see now, which is Gilbert Scott's chamber, sort of 1945-ish to 1950. But it's on the same footprint. It's very much the same plan. The benches are exactly the same. The thing that's most distinctive, I think, about the Victorian chamber is this sort of coving right at the back of the back benches, and the pillars, the little columns that give a sort of rhythm to the chamber. It's probably a rather darker place at all. The Strangers Gallery is now a much bigger space than it was before, and you've lost some of the old ladies gallery from the back, but essentially it looks the same, and it in sort of practical ways it is the same. What's it like to take pictures in?
Well, it's funny you say about it being much darker then, because I can't imagine it being very much darker than it is now. I mean, we don't get much natural daylight in there. There's a lot of kind of warm lighting from the lights above. So I think the tricky bit of my job really is the lighting and balancing the lighting. Also, it kind of gives this very tungsten quality to it. So it's a warm kind of yellowy light over all the individuals in the chamber, and that again bounces off the dark wood and the green benches. So I find that I'm constantly trying to keep an eye on my exposure and my white balancing, and obviously I'm not allowed to use flash because that's very distracting to proceedings. So it is a bit of a struggle, but I think over the years I've learned to work with like the low level lighting in and around the chamber and in Parliament in general. It's quite dimly lit. So I used to think that everything had to be very balanced in light, and I'd be very kind of aware of that. But I think now I'm not really afraid of incorporating the darkness and the shadows, or where the light hits certain subjects. I think it's kind of become part of my style now. And whether or not it's the case, I often hear people saying, like, you know, my photos remind them of they've got a kind of painting like quality to them. And obviously whether or not I agree is another thing, but I like to think that the lighting in conjunction with maybe my compositions is probably something to do with that.
And I mean, the other obvious difference is the color. I mean, my pictures are obviously black and white, but apart from that, they're dominated by very subfast, you know, black and white politicians wearing dark things. I mean, your pictures, I mean, that one we see now is very different. You know, they're nice splashes of color.
Yeah. I mean, I think color can definitely enhance the telling of the story in a modern chamber, and you can definitely see that from the illustrations, you know, you just shown, and then the injection of color in my photos. And I also think, you know, the photos with color can highlight MPs' individuality in the chamber. I mean, sometimes their outfits or hair color can even add a sense of, you know, personality or humor to the shot, you know, a funky tie or a sock or something like that. And I think in recent times, you know, we've seen the introduction of masks to the chamber. So I've seen a lot of MPs, you know, expressing their own personalities through the masks they wear, which can also make a really interesting photo. And it's kind of, you know, you're almost wearing your beliefs or expressing yourself through color or through what you're wearing without even having to say anything. I think I use colors in my photos to kind of draw out an element to it. It can definitely complete a photo. Sometimes I have something in my mind, and then I'll get there and I'll see something that I think might be quite an interesting focal point. And I guess this is an example of that. I mean, this was Theresa May leaving the chamber after one of the many Brexit votes that I sat through and photographed. And she's in a trademark blue suit that she wore quite a lot throughout the Brexit period. And I saw her leaving in a kind of sea of grey suits. And she just stood out as she walked out. And I just think that this kind of pop of blue colour just really draws the viewer's eyes directly to her. So yeah, I definitely feel like colour plays a big part in my photos now.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Picture, and yeah, that picture is obviously taken from above, looking right down, and presumably from the press gallery, and that's interesting. I mean, if you look at a lot of my pictures, they are clearly taken from up there. I mean, this is a picture by one of the graphics artists. This is the French artist Paul Renoir, who's fantastic, and he's drawing just a sketch of the gallery, looking down right on top of the speaker's chair, a view with which Jess must be really familiar with. And you can see how that view shapes a lot of their pictures. This one's by Renoir again. It's a sketch of the Liberal government front bench during the debate on the first Home Rule Bill. So, you know, a fantastically big political moment in June 1886, and there's Gladstone right in the centre of the shot with John Morley beside him, and it's lovely, that sort of pencil, very immediate sort of feeling that you get from it. But you can so often see that they're being taken from up there. This is another one. Here we are a few years on, with Gladstone being cheered at the beginning of the debate, the debate on no confidence in the Salisbury government in August 1892, which means that Gladstone comes back into government, and it's by the Scottish artist Alexander Boyd for the Daily Graphic, and again it's got that really, really sketchy, quick quality, and again you see how crowded and how atmospheric it is during that debate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at these and it just kind of brings back memories of when I've been sat up there with the chamber really full, and I mean, it's very reminiscent of shots that I can kind of think of that I've taken from that angle. As you said, I've been up there many times, and it's I think when it's busy, it's a very restrictive place, so you have to kind of get your angle right. I guess that goes back to anticipating a moment and getting your angle right before you even take the shot, but if you get that right, it can provide some really great great kind of views, as this kind of shows you as well. This is one of the photos during Brexit of the tellers, and so I mean I prefer being up in, this is from the press gallery, I have to say, and you can just about make out the speaker's chair in the foreground. So I am on, I think on that first slide, Paul, you've got the people kind of peering over. And I mean, it's not too dissimilar from a really busy day in the Commons now. During this debate, I'm almost sure that we'd have, the lobby journalists or any reporters and myself kind of leaning over to see what the vote was before it gets to the table of the House, so that you get an idea of like which way you're going to tell the story, and which way you kind of predict the reactions of a shot. So yeah, the press gallery can be a really great place to kind of capture all different sides, especially if you're not sure which way a vote's going to go. Equally, I really love taking photos of the press gallery itself now, because I don't think we see enough of kind of what happens around the chamber and the reporters and the stuff that makes it happen. And I feel like sometimes if you put the press gallery in the shot, it kind of tells a story in itself. For example, here, this was just after the COVID announcements and hybrid parliament had been set up, and as you can see, I mean, it really shows the story of just how sparse it is, without all the people present. So I think that the galleries themselves can provide a part of the story as well. Although I would probably say you kind of feel a little bit distant from the action. So my earlier work, I spent a lot of time up in the press gallery, but now I do take a lot of time to shoot in and around from the chamber floor, because I think I find some of my best compositions there.
That's a really interesting an important difference between you and them back 140 odd years ago, because mostly they really just weren't able to access those sites. They were stuck in the gallery, or sometimes under the gallery they got access there. So when they wanted to show something more intimate, or what was actually going on around the table, they just really had to use their imaginations, and they did it a lot. I mean, this is an example that this is a Sydney Prior Hall picture of the old Chancellor of the Exchequer and the new. So this is Lord Randolph Churchill at the dispatch box just at the beginning of the new Salisbury government in September 1886, after the July election removed Gladstone's Liberals and put his government in power with Randolph Churchill as Chancellor. So you can see this sort of fantastically atmospheric shot with Randolph twirling his moustache and Gladstone looking very grumpy on the other side. It's really odd angle, and it's really foreshortened to sort of heighten the effect. Slightly odd, and I probably wouldn't recognize it from the actual chamber if you were there, but it's one of those quite creative solutions to the problem, trying to get those two characters in the shot. Here's another one from 1892. To Arthur Balfour introducing the Irish Local Government Bill, and what you get here is the back of Arthur Balfour. So this is as if it was shot from the back of the government benches, from the government back bench, and looking towards the Irish on the other side, who, it has to be said, are extremely sceptical about Balfour's local government bill and starting to do a bit of barracking. So he's there to try and get in that sort of reaction of what's going on. and then there's this one which is a sort of stunning picture, which I don't think I'm not entirely sure who the artist is for this. I think it's probably Prior Hall again, of Gladstone just standing just immediately behind the Speaker's chair, and again, this characteristic gesture of cupping his ear cupping his hand to his ear to hear what's going on, just peeping out. It's a really really backroom shot, as it shot. I'm using Jess's language now.
I mean, I love this kind of thing. It's quite a new angle for me, actually, or I say new, but a more preferred angle that I've started playing around with. I've got a shot here. This is actually from behind the Speaker's chair, and obviously Jeremy Corbyn's I guess you can see to the right hand side is the end of the chair, and Jeremy Corbyn's leaning over having a quiet word with the Speaker. And I mean, I've used this kind of angle a little bit recently. Again, I think, like you were saying, it kind of shows another aspect to the House of Commons. And I think in the next slide I have here, this is a figure of one of the Conservative whips listening in on the Prime Minister at PMQs. And for me, obviously he's behind the Speaker's chair there on the left hand side, so this is the kind of side that people won't see on broadcasted on the TV, but it gives a sense of like the secondary narrative running around the chamber. There's this kind of narrative of how things work and the way that procedural matters are managed and discussed to make sure that the chamber runs smooth. And meanwhile, you've got in the kind of public facing side, you've got Boris at the dispatch box during PMQs. So it's a merge of the kind of the private and the public together, but kind of wanting to give the element of what it's like and the feeling of kind of the backstage behind the scenes stuff that happens during really big debates or big moments in the parliamentary calendar or in the week. And then I've got another little shot, which I think is quite reminiscent of the Balfour shot, actually, Paul. Although I can't get on the benches, which would be great, but obviously I can't get that close. But it's a similar angle. Obviously, you would have Balfour at the dispatch box there. So this is kind of a reverse shot of Ian Blackford addressing the front bench there at I'm not too sure which debate this is, but it looks like probably in 2019. And again, it's a nice way of kind of getting the two sides of the chamber together in one frame, which you probably wouldn't have necessarily seen before.
Yeah, it's a great picture, and I mean a lot of these pictures are of the big occasions when the chamber is really full and there's a lot of noise and sort of atmosphere going on, and that's just exactly what a lot of the Victorian and Edwardian big pictures show. This is Harry Furness pen wash drawing of the chamber, absolutely packed with Gladstone speaking, and they clearly want to get that sense of atmosphere in, probably not often quite as much atmosphere as is happening here. This is one of several pictures of the great occasion, or well, great is probably the wrong word, the occasion in July 1893, when there's huge tension and there's a fight develops in the chamber after somebody shouts out that Joseph Chamberlain is a Judas for deserting Gladstone and the Liberal Party. This is during the debates on the second Home Rule Bill, and a fight breaks out, and it's in committee, and the Speaker has to come back and restore order. And it's one of the few occasions on which we get sort of open fighting going on in the chamber. I don't suppose, Jess, you've seen quite that going on, but though it may have come close to it, but you know, that atmosphere, you must experience a lot of that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think you know, it's one of the main things that I am constantly trying to visualize, which is very hard to do. You know, to try and visualize an atmosphere is hard at the best of times, but also an atmosphere that many, you know and say that's quite, you know, indescribable and very particular to that, you know, that chamber. So that is the aim. That's kind of what I try and do. It's very loud, very busy. There's not a seat free, as you know, we've seen in a lot of these photos. You know, even after the chamber changed, there's still not a lot of seats free. So there is a real buzz about the place. And yeah, I mean, this is a shot that I took from the chamber floor. This is probably where I like to try and work in the, you know, the busyness of into the photos of a scene. So this is me kind of trying to get in amongst the scrum of MPs that are by the bar of the House, listening in, and you often see this from different angles on the broadcasting cameras. So this is my attempt of trying to kind of convey the busy atmosphere and energy in the chamber on a day that's, you know, a big day. And I think as well with shots like this, I want to try and, you know, bring people into the chamber, into the atmosphere, so they feel like a participant and not just, you know, an observer of a photo. And I mean, it's tough to shoot those kind of things because I'm not like the tallest of people, so having to kind of put my arms, you know, wave my arms up and hope that someone doesn't like step in front of me on the chamber floor, which has happened. Obviously it does. You can't predict what's going to happen. So that is a kind of particularly tough bit on a very kind of busy chamber day. So this is an example of where I've kind of gone up again to the galleries. I think this is in the corner, the top corner, so between the side galleries and the press gallery, just in the corner there, and trying to kind of shoot from this point of view because you get every angle there, and there's no kind of risk in maybe someone, you know, getting in your shot. This photo was taken from Boris Johnson's first PMQs. And I think he had just lost a vote on his Brexit plans the previous evening, which I would have been in for. And so they were keen to get on the front foot by accusing the opposition of supporting a policy to delay Brexit. So then you had the opposition really pressing back hard for details of, you know, proposals that the government were putting forward to the EU. And that was all under wraps. So there was a lot of tension at this moment in time. And again, trying to convey like different stages in that kind of busy Brexit period was always quite a challenge. But I mean, I like to think that this angle kind of shows how divided the House was at that time. So yeah.
I suppose one of the differences, perhaps, for you both is that we find that in the images that Jess is taking, she obviously has got a kind of professional duty to cover the whole of the house, whereas I guess that the kind of commercial imperatives for Paul's Victorian sketches may mean that they kind of were obsessed with a few big characters, a few sort of recognizable faces. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right, and of course they enjoyed sort of focusing on the characters, in individual characters, much more. Harry Furness, who writes a rather wonderful sort of autobiography or description of how he worked, talks about this a lot and how important it is to get, you know, around about 60 members. He got to know their sort of physical characteristics really well. So they do focus on characters. Gladstone, Sir William Harcourt, who's huge, Randolph Churchill, Joseph Chamberlain, Arthur Balfour, they come up time and time again. This is one of Furness's famous pictures of Balfour, the very languid, very aristocratic Balfour. And here he is again, a very, very distinctive style and very distinctive public image. Furness, of course, is most famous for his pictures of Gladstone, and this is a sort of fairly straightforward one, though you can see the famous collar starting to emerge. Gladstone wearing, who's well into his 80s at this stage, is wearing a rather sort of retro collar, wing collar, and Furness just develops this into a fantastic thing that has a life of its own, really, and these brilliant series of caricatures. So that there's tons of those sort of things, but I Jess can't do that, obviously, but
yeah, not quite, but I do feel like a large part of my role is character study. I mean, I spend a lot of the time analysing the way in which a member gestures, or the different ways that they carry themselves, the different ways that they speak. And everyone's very different. It kind of changes from speaker to speaker. So there's a few examples here of people at the dispatch box, and there you can see the kind of styles change. And when I was looking and researching into what I would talk about character, I kind of didn't realise that it is such a massive part of the work that I do. And I remember after a general election or reshuffle, and it was the first session of a new parliament, and I went in and took some photos, and there was nothing particularly different, and I felt exhausted. And I came out feeling like, why am I feeling so exhausted? And then it dawned on me that I'd spent the last 3 years or so watching and analysing certain ways cabinet ministers or shadow ministers spoke at the dispatch box, to the point where you can almost anticipate an expression or a gesture, the way that they carry themselves, the different places that they direct their speeches to. So it really was like starting that process all over again. And it does sound a bit daft, saying it, but there is a kind of element of rhythm and like almost like a dance between like the debate between backbenchers and frontbenchers, and the way that the debate kind of carries out. And so I think in trying to kind of understand that, and the changes in tempo from like member to member, really does help me in portraying like the different characters and the personalities within the chamber. You also have kind of like the flip side as well of certain individuals maybe being a bit trickier to photograph because they don't look up, or they don't there's very kind of fleeting moments of them kind of using hands or anything to kind of make a shot, so you end up kind of waiting for these these moments to happen. And that's also kind of a challenge in kind of showing character within the chamber. Also, flip side of that is, I mean, I know, Paul, you were talking about people at the dispatch box, but you also had some people sat down, or the quieter moments in the chamber. And I think that I try my best to kind of show character or outside of the arena of the chamber. So this is a shot of David Lammy looking on towards Keir Starmer being in the chamber, and David Lammy is kind of just outside the chamber looking in. And then also you've got kind of pauses and little moments within debates. This is Matt Hancock during a COVID debate, having a moment of reflection there. And then also Boris just before PMQs, and this shot, I mean, I just happened to pass the back of the chair and I saw him waiting there on his own, which it doesn't happen very often because, you know, a Wednesday there's so many people around. So I managed to kind of nab this shot, which is obviously you've got the kind of backlit from the Commons chamber there and framed by the doors. So yeah, I like to think that I try my best to kind of show character, but from across the chamber.
Well, certainly so. We're getting to a point now where our time is drawing quite short, and I'm conscious that we will want to make sure that we take questions from the audience. So perhaps I could just get us to wrap up by asking you briefly to talk about how pictures are seen and consumed by the public in the late Victorian period and the present. So, Paul, what's the impact of your pictures on the public?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think these pictures that emerge in the sort of late 1880s and 1890s, they must give Parliament a prominence in the public mind that it simply has never had before. That, you know, the public is almost daily being treated to images of what is going on in the House of Commons, and more than any other single place almost. I mean, I guess that the House of Commons is the most illustrated interior in Britain during this period. So it's also a time, coincidentally or not, in which Parliament has a really, really high place in public esteem and the public imagination. I think those things have got something to do with each other, though exactly what, I think, you know, one would be hard put to tell. But certainly the focus, the sense of Parliament as this sort of cockpit in which argument goes on is fantastically lively. It's really interesting that this is a moment really from, I suppose, the 1880s to 1990, maybe the end of or maybe the beginning of the First World War, at which it's so prominent. If you start looking at the same sort of magazines after the First World War, it just disappears, really. There are no, or very, very rare images from the House of Commons. And that's got, I'm sure, something to do with the fact that these artists are being replaced by photographs, and you can't photograph inside the House of Commons. So there's nothing really to show. You can't photograph because the House of Commons has never allowed it until very recently. So there's nothing really to get a grip on, and I guess the consumers of these magazines just didn't didn't want those sort of images anymore. So I think, you know, prestige and illustration sort of interestingly go together. It is going to be very interesting. Where, you know, it's a really interesting coincidence that Jess is taking pictures at the same time as all of that, all of the Brexit debates made it a really, you know, again, the sort of cockpit of the nation, just in a way that it was during the Home Rule debates in the 1890s and the great dramatic splits in the Irish Party and the Liberal Party and so on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Richard. I was going to say, I mean, in terms of like consumption and engagement, I mean, I'm an impartial voice in the chamber, with no ties to any side. So it really kind of opens up the way that I create my photos and the way that I report from proceedings. And the one thing that I guess stands out to me and that I find the most fascinating is that one photograph that I take can produce, you know, polarizing political opinions, and that, you know, you could put an image out and see it in so many different ways. So I'm particularly interested in this side of things, and how, you know, my photos are a kind of platform for further debate, further engagement, and also for other people to kind of bring their own political, you know, beliefs or bias to a photo. So as much as it's the joy of producing photos, it's the joy of kind of putting them out there and seeing how they're received, and it's, yeah, so consumption and engagement is massively important.
Well, we certainly have some audience response to put to you both tonight on that note. So let me just kick us off by asking a question which has come in here from Paulina, and it's to you both. It's to ask if you could comment perhaps on what might be distinctive about illustrating or photographing the English Parliament, or the UK Parliament in Westminster, as opposed to other legislatures in Europe. Say, you know, has Jess seen images taken in the Bundestag or the US Capitol, things like that, and how those influences might work. Paul, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting question. The sort of extent to which different legislatures are open to photography is quite interesting. Some European legislatures have never seen a problem with it, and you know there is some fantastic pictures of the Reichstag in 1889, and I think that the Dutch Parliament has a sort of huge archive of going back a very long way, whereas you know, it tends to be that parliaments within the Westminster tradition have been much more resistant, and I think the US Congress only allowed it in the 70s. I mean, the big difference between the UK Parliament and a lot of others is of course its shape. The hemicycle is probably easier to move around and get down into and so on. And you know, if you've watched photographers working in other parliaments, you can see how just simple it is for them to get. I don't know if you've talked to any of them, Jess, or seen them at work, but yeah, how?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually thinking exactly the same thing in terms of, you know, the size and the kind of the way that the chamber's built. It's very different to the European style. You know, we've got quite a kind of face-to-face confrontational style of debating within the chamber, which obviously atmosphere that adds to that. So I think that's probably quite a different element to other European parliaments. But also what Paul was saying about logistics, you know, it's our parliament isn't built for easily kind of getting your way around and shooting from. So the logistics of getting shots during, you know, continuously during a debate can prove a challenge at times.
And then I've got a good question here from one member of the audience who just asks about the fact that the sketches obviously take longer to produce in terms of physically recording the image than the photograph, taking a photograph. But does this mean that the sketch artists are more attracted to kind of big set piece events rather than the quieter moments in the life of the house? And I guess that extends to Jess, and whether or not, you know, you take photographs, or you could talk more about that sort of quiet time or areas outside of the big set pieces. Jess, do you want to kick off on this one?
Sure. I mean, it's a really good thing to pick up on. I mean, obviously I'm one person, so I'm not a pool of cameras filming from above that you see from Parliamentary Recording Unit. So for me, I think it goes back to looking at the business and what's coming up that week, and kind of thinking about what those kind of high profile moments are, and what would kind of maybe pique public interest or that kind of thing. So I do tend to kind of prioritize bigger scale things, but then equally, you know, it's important to show the business as usual, you know, the backbench debates, you know, bills, for example, private members ballot. You know, I don't just shoot in the chamber. I take photographs of all the kind of different members' activities that are happening around the estate. Westminster Hall debates as well. I mean, I've taken some photos from the occasional committee, so that there's lots to be you know, taken, like captured basically.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question too. I mean, it would be interesting to know more about the economics of this, because these artists aren't just doing Parliament; they're doing lots of other things. So they're sent to do other assignments. So you know, one guesses that when there's a big debate coming on, that they are sent to do that, and you know, their graphic or whatever expects to do a big picture in its front page or somewhere inside it. But the Daily Graphic, which starts publishing on a daily basis, obviously the first daily illustrated newspaper from 1890. I mean, it does a sketch every week, and the sketch will include, occasions when there's not much going on the benches, and they're just sort of funny little drawings of, people going to sleep on the benches, or people having little chats, behind the speaker's chair, as we've talked about. So there's lots there going on, and I think they do go. They certainly wouldn't have been there as much as Jess, but they certainly were there, not just for the big occasions.
So I think, although our time is drawing short, I can find a way to put together, I think, all of the outstanding questions we have in the chat, because they do all fit together, as they all sort of relate to questions of license for the person taking the photograph or doing the sketch, and then also the ways in which parliamentarians or editors of the magazines may respond to the images of the chamber. So I've got a host of questions which really ask you to touch on, I suppose, for Jess, your working practices in do you find sometimes that MPs ask you to move? Do they have a right to sort of veto or decline your photographing them or taking particular photographs? And for Paul, do you have any interesting examples of the ways in which the editors of the commercial magazines may have chosen what to use, or what sort of asked to be found and to be commissioned in those ways? So really, I suppose, around how far MPs may have had vetoes or controls over what were being done in the past, but also, I suppose, for Jess, about sort of the degree of her discretion versus her impartial role as a servant of the House to make sure that she's covering all angles, literally.
Who do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. In terms of MPs vetoing, no, I've not had that happen to me before. I think, in the early days of my career, it probably was a bit of a shock to see, photographer around the chamber. But I mean, I've been doing this for many, many years now. And I do kind of feel like they're used to me being there. And in terms of vetoing photos, MPs don't have a say to do that. I like to think that I'm kind of discreet as well. You talked about discretion. I think you kind of occasionally see me in the background of shots, but in terms of being discreet around chamber business, I mean, that's at the forefront of my mind, because it is a working building. So I mean, it's not, there just for me. So I'm kind of secondary to proceedings. So discretion is obviously another thing that plays a part in the work that I do.
Yeah, and it is a really interesting question. I can't put my finger on any particular examples of as suggested of editors very deliberately targeting or not targeting. I'm sure there's a certain sense of self-censorship. What people often say about the images produced or published in this period is that they have nothing like the savagery of the sort of early, late Georgian, early Victorian cartoonists, caricaturists. They're a very different type of thing. They're much more illustrative, much less savage. I think the example that you probably go to is the treatment of the Irish Party in this period, which is fascinating. Harry Furness is the most, is an interesting case. He is in fact a Southern Irishman himself. He was born and brought up in Ireland, but he clearly was not a fan of the Irish Party, and his attitudes to the Irish Party track really general English parliamentary attitudes to the Irish Party as a disruptive, often very characterful, noisy, difficult group of people. And I mean, Harry Furness describes an occasion when he's confronted by one of the Irish members who he's drawn not very flatteringly and sketched not very flatteringly, and they have a bit of a row. So that's a sort of very distinct group who are treated badly, I suppose, though they often give rise to some of the most interesting and characterful pictures.
I think for me as well, it's about being transparent and showing reporting from the chamber. So that's everything. It's kind of the good bits, the bad bits, the happy bits, the sad bits. So.
Well, although our time is drawing very short, I'm not going to let us end without taking a question that we got in from Ewan, who is age 7 and is in the audience. And Ewan had a question to put to Jess to ask what's the most exciting part of your job. And I'm going to extend my chair's privilege to also ask Paul, what does he think is the most exciting finding he had from the research professorship looking at this material? So maybe I'll go first to Paul, and then we'll end with Ewan's specific question to Jess. So Paul first.
I think I'd just say that there is all of this fantastic imagery of the late Victorian Parliament, which, I think people too often just gloss over and pass over. I mean, people recognise Harry Furness and his wonderful caricatures, but just the sense of people actually sitting there and drawing this and sketching it and making a visual record and are constantly observing it. People don't look at this stuff these days nearly enough, I think, and it's suddenly a light shone into the Victorian chamber, which just wasn't there before, and we've rather forgotten about it.
And Jess, what's the most exciting thing about your job?
Well, hello, Ewan. I think the exciting part of my job, well, there's a couple of things really, is that there's a lot of kind of diverse things I get to cover. I work at the Tower one day, and then I'll be on the next day. I cover a really wide range of stuff around the parliamentary estate, which always adds an element of excitement. And then in terms of change, I think the excitement will be there during these really historical moments in our political history, and knowing that maybe one day, the photos in the archives that I take might be, held in a discussion like this one day. So, it's kind of a full circle thing for me.
Well, that's fantastic. We hope that Ewan and all other members of the audience have been excited by what they've heard tonight. I want to thank very much on all of your behalves, Jessica and Paul, for such an insightful discussion. And I'll remind everyone that the British Academy's Summer Showcase runs until tomorrow. You can still find out more and catch up with earlier events on the BA's website and their social media channels. But otherwise, I hope you have a very good evening. Thank you.